If you don't get into an Ivy League, you're nothing in this house." That sentence was uttered during what seemed like an ordinary dinner. No yelling, no throwing of plates or chopsticks. Just a soft-spoken statement dropped amidst the clinking of cutlery, but powerful enough to leave me frozen. A moment like that, seemingly fleeting, became the dividing line of my life before I knew who I was, and after I no longer wanted to be someone else's shadow. Before I tell you the story of how I broke free from the mold others forced me to fit into, let me ask you for 5 seconds. If you've ever felt unseen in your own family, please leave a comment. I want to read your story, because maybe, just maybe, we're not as alone as we think. And if you're interested in journeys that break boundaries, hit follow. This story, my story, starts in Boston in a pristine 3-story white house with thick glass windows and neatly trimmed hedges. There everything was polished, orderly, and suffocatingly pressured. I'm Emily Carter, 17 years old, a senior in high school, a well-known cross-country runner at school with a few state medals hanging on my wall. Academics decent. Not top 5 material, but I'd never failed a class. Hobbies track reading psychology books and secretly writing in my journal late at night. In another family, I might have been a source of pride, but not in the Carter household. My father, Professor Thomas Carter, is the head of the economics department at an Ivy League university. He has a deep voice-piercing eyes and a leather-bound notebook he always carries to jot down anything illogical. My mother, Dr. Linda Carter, is a renowned researcher in biopharmaceuticals. Whenever I had a cold, she wouldn't hand me medicine, but would mix a homemade probiotic solution and tell me to drink it. I'm not kidding. My older brother Nathan was just accepted into Harvard Law School, the most prestigious law school in the country. Nathan excels in everything, plays the piano, delivers flawless presentations, and won first place in a statewide debate competition at 15. And me, I know how to breathe correctly during a sprint. I once saved a classmate from fainting due to dehydration during gym class. And I know what it feels like to be compared until your name wears thin. I don't hate them. I just couldn't find my place. I remember one morning before the SATs, my mother placed a smoothie in front of me made of walnuts, bananas, and something that smelled like protein powder. She said it boosts cognition and memory. Nathan drank it every day. I took a sip. It was bitter and thick. But I drank it. Because in my family, no one asks what you like. They just give you what's good for your future. My high school principal once said Emily has outstanding potential in athletics and strong leadership skills in group settings. When my mother heard this, she smiled and replied, "Sports are good for health. But she needs to focus on academics if she wants to follow in the family's footsteps." Sometimes I wondered if I weren't a Carter, who would I be? At the school's career fair, I met someone I'll never forget, Sergeant Amanda Wallace. She stood at the military recruitment booth amid colorful displays from prestigious universities. While most students passed by her table, I stopped. "I used to be a combat medic," she said, "saving people on the battlefield. Not like doctors in hospitals, no machines, no time for lengthy diagnoses. Just a bleeding person, and a single decision." I stood there mesmerized, not by the drama, but by something I'd never felt at home, genuine pride in her voice. "Have you ever thought about going into medicine?" she asked. "I think my mom wants me to. And you." I didn't answer. But that day, for the first time, I picked up a pamphlet about combat medic training. I didn't dare tell anyone. I hid the pamphlet inside my advanced math textbook like a secret. But every night after that, I'd sneak a look at it, read every line, stare at the image of a soldier clutching a medical bag running through gunfire. I didn't know if I had the courage, but I knew if I kept living the path others chose for me, I'd slowly disappear. The day I got my SAT results, 1290. Not bad, but not notable in my house. My mother said nothing, just closed her laptop. My father said you need to retake it. Nathan got 1580. I retook it, got 1310. Still not enough. During application season, I applied to Yale, Princeton, and Columbia as my mother demanded. I also secretly sent an application to a military academy no one knew. The first rejection came, then the second, then the third. During one dinner, my mother looked at me, put more greens on my plate, and said softly like a passing breeze, "If you don't get into an Ivy League, you'll be nothing in this house." I don't know how long I held my breath after that sentence, but when my heartbeat returned, I quietly set my knife and fork down. No tears, no arguments. I was used to swallowing disappointment. After dinner, I went to my room and opened Sergeant Wallace's pamphlet again. The desk lamp illuminated the words, "Not everyone is born to follow the beaten path. Some are made to save lives." I looked in the mirror, saw a brown-haired girl with questioning eyes, not from a lack of confidence, but because she'd never been allowed to believe in herself. Have you ever felt like that? If so, leave a comment. I don't promise answers to every question, but I believe speaking out is the first step to standing up. If there was a summer that completely changed the way I saw myself, it was the summer I was 17 in Vermont. I was sent to my grandfather's house for the summer, partly because my parents needed time to focus on work, and partly I knew because I was no longer the pride they wanted to keep close. My grandfather's house nestled against a lush green hillside, with a faded red tile roof and weathered wooden walls that still held a quiet dignity and warmth. On the porch was a rocking chair where he'd sit and sip tea in the afternoons. In that house there was no SAT pressure, no comparisons to Nathan. Just me, him, and stories that seemed buried deep in time. He was my father's father, and the only person in the family who didn't wear glasses or hold an academic title. Instead, he had a war-injured arm, a bookshelf full of war novels, and a long scar running across the back of his right hand. To me, he was the first man who taught me what courage truly meant. One afternoon, as we pulled weeds in the backyard, I casually asked, "Where were you when you were in the military, Grandpa?" He stopped, leaned on his hoe, and looked into the distance as if time rewound. France, 1944. I was a combat medic. Normandy. I'd never heard my father talk about it. To him, Grandpa's war past was just a temporary phase, a history less prestigious than his current professor title. But to me, it was the first time I saw Grandpa as a real hero. That evening after dinner, he pulled a wooden box from a drawer. Inside was a silver medal engraved with a small red cross surrounded by a laurel wreath, a World War II combat medic badge. "This was on my chest for 3 years," he said, placing it in my hand. "It's not as shiny as an officer's medal, but it's what made people recognize me in the gunfire." I held it surprisingly light, but it weighed heavy on my heart. "Were you ever scared?" I asked. He chuckled softly. "Who isn't? But when you see a young soldier lying there, blood soaking his chest, eyes wide open, there's only one thing left save him. Under gunfire. No machines, no time, just a decision." His words reminded me of Sergeant Wallace, who months earlier had said something similar. Back then it felt like a cinematic image, but now before me was living proof someone who'd done it and survived to tell the tale. In the days that followed every afternoon, I sat listening to his battlefield stories. No glamour or hollow heroism, just cold reality and resilience. He told me about a 19-year-old soldier wounded by shrapnel trembling and calling for his mother as Grandpa bandaged him, about having to choose who to save first when there was only one IV line left, about a rainy night when he had to amputate a leg under the faint glow of a flashlight and flares. I began to realize medicine doesn't just exist in labs. It exists on the front lines where there are no grades, where no one asks if you have a PhD, just whether you can keep someone alive. One evening I couldn't hold back and said, "I don't think I could ever do what you did." He was silent for a moment, then looked at me. "People aren't born brave. They become brave because they have no other choice." I wrote that sentence on the first page of my summer journal. If you've ever been inspired by someone your family didn't fully understand, share it in the comments. Maybe your story will help someone find themselves. I don't know when I started thinking about saving people not in sterile hospitals, but in places that demand more courage than theory. During my runs around the Vermont hills, I began to imagine if one day I was the one carrying a medical bag through gunfire, would I dare? On my last night in Vermont, Grandpa gave me the medal. "Carry it if one day you want to live like I did." I brought it home, tucked it in my pencil case between rulers and pencils. Partly because I feared my mother finding it, partly because it felt like a silent vow, meant just for me. Later, when I stood in a real battlefield covered in blood, mud, and smoke, I'd remember that summer and know a seed had been planted. A quiet seed, but one that when it sprouted was strong enough to change my life. Some choices in life don't come from a blazing moment, but from the quiet accumulation of long, exhausting days. Like my decision to enlist, not to prove anything, but because I couldn't keep living a life that wasn't mine. After my first semester at a state university, I felt like a leaf drifting through soulless academic halls. The school wasn't bad, the professors were good, the classmates friendly, but I didn't belong there. Every morning I woke up asking myself, who am I living for? I studied general biology, organic chemistry, introductory psychology subjects my mother said would keep the medical path open for later. But the more I studied, the more stifled I felt. Every time I entered a lab, I thought of my high school classmate's pale face when I gave him first aid after he fainted. I didn't want to study cells and test tubes. I wanted to save real people. Have you ever felt like you're walking a pre-paved path, but getting more lost with every step? If so, share your story in the comments. Maybe we're walking parallel paths, searching for a true starting point. That fateful afternoon, I went to a career fair only because attendance was mandatory. I passed by booths banking tech medicine law. Everything gave me a headache. Then I stopped, as if an invisible thread pulled my steps. The military recruitment booth was simple, but stood out because of its recruiter, Sergeant Amanda Wallace. Unlike the suit-wearing consultants, she wore a crisp uniform, her gaze steady but not harsh. Before I could say anything, she smiled. "I ever thought about saving lives on a battlefield?" Her question stopped me in my tracks. "Not a doctor, not an operating room," she continued, "but the first person there when someone's shot, injured, panicking. The one who keeps them alive until real help arrives." I swallowed hard. "Is there a program for that?" "Combat medic battlefield medicine. 6 months of training. You learn first aid, field medicine, emergency response. It's not for everyone. But if you want to do something meaningful, this is where it starts." I took the info sheet from her hand, my heart both scared and light. 3 weeks later, after many sleepless nights, I decided I would enlist. I would leave the college I never truly chose. I would do something no one in my family had ever done, choose the battlefield over the lecture hall. That evening I came home to announce my decision. A typical dinner, Friday's roast beef by Mom-Dad, reading financial news on his tablet. Nathan visiting for the weekend polo shirt, and gelled hair as always. "I have something to say," I began, setting down my fork. 3 pairs of eyes looked up. I met each gaze, then took a deep breath. "I've enlisted. I'm going to become a combat medic." Silence. A silence so deep I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. My mother set her fork down, hands trembling. "You're joking, right?" "I'm serious." My father sat motionless. Nathan was the first to laugh, a dry, mocking chuckle, as if I'd just said I was joining the circus. Emily, really, playing soldier. "Do you know what they do with new medics? Desk jobs, handing out cold medicine, filling out paperwork." I clenched my fists. "I'll be trained for the battlefield. I won't be at a desk." My mother burst into tears. "Oh my God, what are you doing with your life? We've given you everything, and you're throwing it away to wear a uniform and go into war zones." I felt like I'd committed treason, but I stayed steady. Finally, my father looked up, his eyes cold as his lecture halls. "People who join the military are those with no other options," he said. "Failures." "Do you know what you're saying, Emily?" "I know," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't want to live a life that isn't mine anymore." Silence. I stood up, left the table. No one called me back. That night, I lay in my old room, staring at the periodic table chart taped to the ceiling since 9th grade. I felt sad, but not regretful. For the first time, I'd done something just for me. If you've ever had to tell your family you're choosing a completely different path, and got disappointment instead of support, can you share how that felt? I believe someone needs to read it right now. The next morning, I left early. No one saw me off. I carried a suitcase, a bag of books, and my grandfather's medal. I didn't know who I'd become, but I knew I wouldn't be a shadow in that house anymore. They say in the military, you don't become a better version of yourself. You're stripped down, broken and forged anew with steel mud, sweat, and tears into a completely new person. I thought that was an exaggeration, until I lived it. My first day at Fort Sam Houston, I stood among hundreds of recruits, clutching my backpack back, soaked with sweat, heart pounding like it might leap out of my chest. We all looked the same, stiff new uniforms, unfamiliar boots, bewildered eyes. But the one thing that set me apart was knowing I was leaving an entire past behind. If you've ever started over in a place where no one knows who you are, comment, "I started over." I want to see you in your own journey. Basic training was like being thrown into a forge turned to maximum heat. Every morning started with a 4:30 a.m. whistle, 5-mile runs, push-ups, burpees, rope pulls carrying teammates. By the time we got to medical training, we learned to insert breathing tubes, start IVs, perform CPR, all under time pressure, shouting instructors, and sometimes simulated gunfire. I thought I was fit. I was a track athlete in high school, but this was a different kind of fitness. Running when you're starving, lifting when your arms shake, memorizing drug lists while teammates scream and smoke clouds the air. One evening, I silently cried in the bathroom, not from pain, but from fear that I wasn't good enough. I remembered my father's eyes when he said those who enlist are failures. I wanted to prove him wrong. But in that moment, I wasn't sure. In those shaky days, I met the person who'd become my anchor, Monica Torres. Torres, 2 years older, Puerto Rican with sharp eyes and a hearty laugh. From the start, she radiated an energy that drew people in. Our first conversation was when I botched an IV insertion during a simulation test. I was so disappointed, I considered dropping out. Torres approached no judgment, just handed me a water bottle and said, "Try again. The dead don't get second chances. But you're still alive." It wasn't empty encouragement. It was a gentle command. And I followed it. From that day, we became training partners. Every evening, while others rested, Torres and I practiced under flashlights, bandaging IVs, CPR emergency wraps in 60 seconds. She taught me how to observe, how to stay calm in chaos. During a night rescue simulation, I had to handle 3 victims at once, a broken bone shock and unconsciousness from blood loss. No help. Limited time. I thought I'd fail. But everything Torres and I practiced clicked in my mind. I did it. And not just pass, I got a perfect score. I started to realize I had instincts no one taught me, quick reflexes, steady hands, and a focus that made the world disappear. My instructor called me Ice Hands. It was the highest praise for a medic. For the first time, I wasn't compared to Nathan. No one cared what school I'd attended, only whether I could save lives. Have you ever discovered a part of yourself you didn't know existed? If so, share that moment. It might inspire someone doubting themselves. At the end of training, we had our final exam, a field simulation. In a mock forest at night, with smoke gunfire and screaming victims made up to look real. The task keep them alive for the first 20 minutes until help arrived. I was paired with Torres. We bandaged wounds, started IVs, stabilized spines, checked pupils, monitored pulses, all in the dark. When time was up, we were the only team with no fatalities. The final week, we lined up under the blazing Texas sun to receive our certificates. My name rang out. Emily Carter graduated with distinction, Combat Medic Division 1. I stepped forward, hands trembling, eyes bright. In my pocket, Grandpa's medal was still there. Torres slapped my shoulder as we left the line. "Welcome to the battlefield, Ice Hands." I smiled a smile without fear. I used to think that if I was good enough, different enough, tried hard enough, my family would see me. They'd look at me the way they looked at Nathan. Call my name with pride, not worry or embarrassment. But that Christmas, when I returned home in my uniform for the first time, I learned some gazes are frozen in the past and no metal can thaw them. I stepped off the Boston train at 6 a.m. backpack, slung over my shoulder, carrying a small gift bag for Mom. My uniform was pristine, polished buttons, crisp shoulder boards, and a few honor ribbons from training pinned to my chest. I'd learned to stand tall, hold my gaze steady, walk with the confidence of someone who knows why they exist. But when the door opened, my mother only said, "Oh, you're back. Are you cold?" Not a glance at the achievements I wore. Not a question about training friends or what I'd been through. If you've ever come home after a major turning point, only to find your family acting like nothing happened, leave a comment. Maybe we're all familiar with that feeling, both comforting and painfully distant. At the Christmas Eve dinner, the table was set as always. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, all perfect, but no room for my story. Dad asked Nathan about his constitutional law class. Mom talked about new funding for her institute. I sat there, smile-fixed hands clenched under the table. I graduated with distinction. I said, breaking the silence as gently as I could, "I've been assigned to a combat medic unit level 1. My mother nodded as if I'd said I made the choir team. "How long are you going to wear that costume?" she asked, cutting her chicken. I froze. "This is an official uniform, Mom." Nathan smirked, not looking up from his phone. "You handing out headache pills at camp." I looked at them. Wanted to tell them about sleepless nights at Fort Sam Houston, the field test, keeping 3 wounded alive in 20 tense minutes. But then I realized they didn't ask, not because they forgot, but because they didn't believe what I did mattered. That night I stood alone on the porch, winter wind cutting through my coat, but not as cold as their words. I looked in the mirror by the door, saw myself uniform, pristine gaze tough, and saw the reflection of the girl who once studied under a desk lamp, hoping Mom would say, "I'm proud of you." I thought of Monica Torres. If she were here, she'd probably say, "They don't need to understand. As long as your team does, but that's easier said than accepted." Have you ever quietly given up on wanting recognition from family? And if you still think about it, have you truly let it go? Share your thoughts. I want to know how many of us are learning to live without what we once craved. The next morning I woke early, packed my things, and left the unopened gift on the dining table. In my pocket was my dog tag, in my bag the metal box I didn't take it out. Not because I was ashamed, but because I understood some homes only open their doors to a certain version of you. And if you're no longer that person, you either stand outside or leave. I took an earlier bus back to base. As it turned the final corner, I glanced back at the 3-story White House, once my home. This time, I didn't feel regret. I only saw clearer than ever that no amount of glory can light up a heart that refuses to open. There's no triumphant music or clear signal to warn you that you're about to step into a defining moment. Just the crunch of tires on gravel, the crackle of a radio, and panting breaths in your earpiece. Then suddenly, the world explodes. A year after graduating, I was deployed to Afghanistan, Kandahar region. Our forward medical team was attached to a high-mobility combat platoon moving weekly. I was the only medic. No operating rooms, no bright lights, no colleagues in white coats. Here, patients were people who laughed with you in the morning and could bleed out by afternoon. That day, the one whose memory still carries the smell of smoke iron and dry dust in my throat, we were returning to base after a short mission. The convoy rolled over rocky terrain, dust clouding the air. Boom! An explosion tore the ground. The lead vehicle was flung like a toy, crashing in a cloud of black smoke. I leaped from my truck before I could think. No time to be scared. No other choice. I ran into the fire dust and screams. Staff Sergeant Cooper, the guy who shared MRE cookies every afternoon, was trapped in the vehicle. Blood gushed from his thigh, pulsing in jets. Femoral artery. I knew I had minutes. I pulled him from the seat, my med bag banging against my hip. No time for gloves. I pressed my body against the wound, then tied a tourniquet. Blood soaked my wrists, collar, ankles. Bullets still whizzed overhead, but my hands didn't shake. They couldn't. "Stay with me, Coop," I whispered, inserting a breathing tube. "I'm not letting you go today." After 20 minutes that felt longer than a lifetime, a medevac chopper arrived. I handed Cooper off and turned to help 2 others, one with a broken bone, one with a head injury. When I collapsed on the ground, night had fallen. That night I slept in a field tent uniform still blood-stained. Torres put a hand on my shoulder. "You were a real guardian angel today." If you've ever faced a life or death moment, whether in war or everyday life, where you forgot yourself to save someone else, leave a comment. I believe there's a small but fierce Emily in all of us. A week later, I was called to report. My commander awarded me the Bronze Star with valor, noting courageous, decisive saved 3 soldiers under direct fire. I called home. Mom answered. "Oh, you're calling at a good time. Dad's planning a small party." "Great, I just got a medal for the last mission." Your brother just got promoted, a junior partner at a top New York law firm." I held the phone away like dodging a slap. They didn't ask if I was hurt, if I was scared, or who I saved. Just talked about Nathan as always. The next message from Dad read, "Proud of my kids growing up." Unclear who kids included. I opened the metal box, still tucked in my chest pocket. The metal gleamed under the tense light. No one in my family knew how heavy it was, not in weight, but in the memories it carried. But I knew. My team knew. And Staff Sergeant Cooper, now recovering in Germany, definitely knew. Do you think sometimes the greatest things we do happen when no one in our family sees? Or does that leave you feeling empty? I'm still learning to answer that. There are moments when you're no longer yourself, no longer Emily, no longer someone's daughter, no longer a medic with a serial number. You're just a breath, a pair of hands trembling from cold and blood, a will not to let yourself fall because someone beside you needs you to live. That mission was called Retrieval Echo, a humanitarian extraction in Pakistan's border mountains. Scouts reported 3 American medical personnel kidnapped by a local extremist group. I was assigned to the medical support team for a Special Forces unit. My call sign Angel 4, a name I never thought fit, until we fell from the sky. That night, 2 Black Hawk helicopters glided through the dark like ghosts. I checked my med bag one last time, telling myself in retrieve hostages out in 90 minutes. But war never follows plans. Less than 10 miles from the target ground, anti-aircraft fire erupted. I still hear the pilots shout, "Brace, brace." My chopper shuddered, screamed like a wounded beast, and crashed into a narrow ravine. The impact threw me against steel, the world splitting in 2. When I came to, thick black smoke choked the air, my ears ringing from the blast. Someone was screaming. Someone had no voice left to scream. I didn't think. I crawled. Major Reynolds had a severe head injury lying motionless. Lieutenant Wallace had a broken arm, blood seeping from his shoulder. I staggered to pull them from the wreckage before leaking fuel caught fire. My hands tore, my back screamed, but I didn't stop. We were 9 left. 2 couldn't move. And the enemy was closing in. Bullets started whistling, then sporadic explosions. I grabbed the radio calling for backup, but the signal flickered. We were trapped. For the next 48 hours, that valley became my only world, a deathly gorge between jagged cliffs. I bandaged wounds while loading rifles, monitored vitals while helping dig foxholes. When shrapnel hit my thigh, I grimaced, tied a cloth, and kept going. Pain had to wait after others' lives. The worst came on the second night. Sergeant Bennett took a bullet to the chest-collapsed lung. I had 1 syringe, a ballpoint pen, and a tiny flashlight. I propped Bennett against my shoulder, held the light in my teeth, and cut his skin with a utility knife. The needle went into his chest, no anesthesia. He hissed. I didn't cry, didn't shake, but my hands were slick with sweat and blood. In that moment, I saw the team's eyes, panic, trust, desperation all fixed on me. I couldn't fail. Not here. Have you ever faced 48 hours where you fought for every breath, not just yours, but others? If you've had a moment that made you feel alive in the truest sense, share it in the comments. I want to hear what kept you standing. By the 3rd morning, I was the only one still fully mobile. 6 were injured, 1 dying. No medevac yet. No drugs, no water. I climbed the ridge, dodging stray bullets to get a clear signal. Through the smoke, I saw insurgents moving. I hit the radio Angel 4, sending strike coordinates. Target northeast 2.3 kilometers out. 10 minutes later, the sky roared. Bright streaks cut the night. Hell rained from heaven. We had a chance. I made a stretcher from a field tent, dragged Major Reynolds with 1 arm, supported Bennett with the other. We stumbled through the forest, avoiding every light, every sound. I don't remember how long we moved. Only that my feet bled, my shoulders swelled, my mouth was dry as sand. When I saw the medevac chopper's blades flash on the ridge, I cried for the first time in those 48 hours. Not from pain or fear, but because somehow we were all still alive. The mission report noted I sustained 4 soldiers' lives under enemy encirclement, while injured and critically under-resourced. My commander called me a true angel, but I didn't feel angelic. I felt like a soldier who knew the value of every heartbeat, every breath, every wound stitched in the dark. When I called home afterward, Mom answered, "You're hurt again?" "Not badly, just a deep scratch." Dad's busy planning Nathan's award ceremony. He's speaking at an international conference next week." I nodded, though no one saw. I wasn't angry, just understood sometimes the most extraordinary things happen when no one's watching. I never thought the thigh wound would be the easiest to heal. The nightmares, the sudden roar of choppers in my head, the hands that still felt blood-soaked, they clung to me like thick darkness no light could pierce. Walter Reed was a gathering place for broken warriors, and though I could still walk, wear my uniform nod to senior officers, I knew a part of me was no longer whole. I stayed awake my first night at the rehab center, not from leg pain, but from fear of closing my eyes and seeing Torres screaming into the radio, Cooper grimacing in pain, or myself dragging a battered body across jagged rocks. Sometimes I wished I'd just broken a leg, a shoulder, or been unconscious for those 48 hours. It'd be easier than remembering. If you've ever had recurring nightmares of a life or death moment, I hope you'll share in the comments. Maybe we're not as alone as we think. On my 4th day at Walter Reed, I called home. "Dad, I just wanted to say I'm recovering well." On the other end, his keyboard still clicked. "Good. But Emily, have you thought about your future?" I laughed, not sure if it was sarcasm or bitterness. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time to consider a more stable path, a degree, a real career." "You think what I just went through isn't a career?" Silence. Then a faint sigh. "All right, take care." The call ended. I didn't cry. Didn't get angry, just felt empty. I started writing letters, not to anyone, just to myself, or maybe to the 17-year-old sitting at that dinner where Mom cried, Nathan mocked, and Dad quietly boxed my worth. "Emily, if you ever feel like you're nothing, remember a soldier woke up in your hands and smiled weakly saying thank you. A mother somewhere didn't lose her child. An entire Special Forces team came back whole because you didn't let go. No one needs to clap. No news needs to praise you. No family needs to validate you. Because true value sometimes lies in a single life kept alive. I folded the letter, tucked it into my wallet under the worn silver medal Grandpa gave me that summer. A week later, I received a plain brown envelope, no clear markings. Outside, printed in bold, confidential, Department of Defense. I opened it. Inside was a single printed sheet, brief. Sergeant Emily Carter, you are hereby summoned to the office of the Secretary of the Army. Appointment 0900 Monday. Attire Class A uniform. Clearance Level 3. Contact no one. No signature, no sender, no explanation. Just a clear feeling. Everything was about to change. I thought I was used to being underestimated. But nothing prepared me for seeing Jessica Long again. Jessica, the girl with the smug smile in senior year English class. The one who laughed when I said I'd enlist, saying, "You're probably only fit to be a nurse in a barracks." She and her friends were the epitome of model success. High-grade student council president accepted to an Ivy League by fall. I wasn't. And now, nearly 3 years later, fate brought us together, not in a prestigious university setting, but at a veterans support center in D.C., where I was assigned to assist military families in recovery. I recognized Jessica instantly, but this time, no red lipstick, no designer glasses. Her face was haggard eyes, dark with exhaustion, hands clutching her coat like it was her only anchor. "Who are you meeting today, Ms. Long?" the nurse outside asked, nodding toward me. "Officer Mitchell will work with you." Jessica turned. Her face paled when she saw me. In that moment, I saw shock and shame mix in her eyes. "Emily," she whispered, almost disbelieving. I nodded. "Hello, shall we begin?" She said nothing during our first session. I asked about sleep heart rate anxiety questions I'd learned to peel back the layers of fear around those who'd suffered loss. Finally, Jessica blurted, "I lost my husband in a mission last year. An ambush in Kandahar." I stopped writing. "I'm so sorry." "What was his name?" "David. Sergeant David Long." I heard the stifled sob. Her eyes wavered, searching for somewhere to avoid mine. "He used to say, 'Combat medics were silent angels.'" Her voice trembled. I didn't believe him, until his body was brought back. I realized without them, I wouldn't have gotten his body intact. She gripped her coat's edge. "And then I saw your name on the staff list. Emily Carter. God." I smiled faintly. Mitchell now, but I'm still me. Jessica's eyes welled up. The first time I saw her truly fragile. "I was awful to you. I thought I was better than you. And now, I'm the one sitting here not knowing how to live after loss." I said gently, "You're living, and you're finding a way to heal. That's the bravest thing." "But how can you forgive?" she asked, barely looking up. I placed my hand on the table, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel my presence. "I'm here to help, not to judge. What you said in the past doesn't change what I can do for you today." She broke down sobbing. It was one of the hardest sessions, not because of the medical aspect, but the emotions. But it also showed me strength isn't in making others bow, but in helping them stand when they think they're broken forever. I told Monica Torres about it the next evening as we sat by a vending machine. "You're always like that." Monica shook her head, smiling. "You save people even when they don't know they need saving." I laughed. "If it was you, would you forgive?" Monica shrugged. "I don't know, but I think forgiveness doesn't come from logic. It comes from the pain you've tasted and don't want others to swallow whole like you did." I stayed silent for a long time. Maybe Monica was right. Maybe only after facing the deepest darkness do you understand what light is. If you're reading this, I want to ask, have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you? And if so, what made you choose forgiveness over revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear. After 4 weeks of therapy, Jessica gripped my hand, looking at me not with guilt, but with pure gratitude. "I still see David in my dreams," she said. "But now I see light too." I squeezed her hand gently. "The dreams will change. Not because he's gone, but because you're starting to move forward." As she left the room, I watched her back, not the girl from the high school student council, but a woman learning to live with loss. That afternoon, I opened my phone and saw a message from an unknown number. "Officer Mitchell, report to the office of the Secretary of the Army. Call sign, Silent Night." I knew peace wouldn't last long. The next door was opening, bringing a mission unlike anything I'd known. I never thought my father would change. He was the kind of man who believed in logic, prestige, and measurable success. Articles, grades, scholarships, that was his language. Me, I was a hyphen in the Carter family's perfect resume. Until one day I realized some things don't need to be shouted to be true love. That day I was at the Veteran Rehab Center when a message from an old college friend, Casey, popped up. "Emily, your dad just did something incredible at a Yale conference. Here's the clip." I frowned, clicked the link. The screen showed a familiar lecture hall sign reading Conference on Education's Role in Building Modern Citizens. A professor stood at the podium, voice sharp. I find it sad that society today glorifies military heroes, mostly people who couldn't make it to college. They should have studied to save lives with intellect, not force. A murmur rose. Then, an older man with graying hair stood slowly. My father, Dr. Thomas Carter, renowned Ivy League economics professor. His face was stern, but his eyes held a restrained pain. "May I speak?" he said clearly. "I'm Thomas Carter. I have a daughter, Emily Carter." The room froze. So did I. Emily didn't get into an Ivy League. She wasn't valedictorian nor invited to academic conferences, but she kept 15 teammates alive during an ambush in Pakistan's mountains. Injured, she still saved lives, kept her wits while blood coated her hands. No one fails college to do that. The room's stunned silence was palpable through the video. His voice wasn't that of a scholar defending a thesis, but a father letting go of pride to stand by his daughter. I used to think success was professors' PhDs, lawyers, but I realized no transcript measures the courage to crawl through a kill zone to pull a dying person back from death's edge. My eyes blurred. Somewhere in a hall hundreds of miles away, my father did what I never dared dream he defended me. "We can debate education philosophy forever," he continued, "but if you're ever trapped in a bombed building, trust me, you won't want the highest SAT score. You'll want an Emily Carter, someone who knows how to keep your heart beating a few minutes longer." The video ended with prolonged applause and a standing ovation. I sat stunned in the small veteran center room. Something fell down my cheek. Not tears of sadness, but something different. If you've ever had a moment of being seen even once, share it in the comments. We might have more in common than you think. A week later, when I returned home, my father didn't mention it. He was still himself, reserved proper. But in the living room on the bookshelf, beside his cherished Wealth of Nations, was a small frame. Inside was a photo of me saving Cooper covered in mudblood and a steely gaze mid-battle. Below, etched Emily Carter, Combat Medic, Afghanistan, 2023. I looked at my father. He gave a faint smile. Some colleagues asked for the clip. Now they know our family doesn't just have one person good at saving lives. I didn't need more words. No hug. That was enough. Enough to know some changes are quiet but profound. Days later, I received an official schedule from the Pentagon, a Distinguished Service Cross ceremony at the White House with the president attending. I could invite 5 family members. I sent an email, one line. "I'm receiving a medal at the White House next week. If you and Mom want to come, I'll reserve spots." The reply came 3 hours later. "We'll be there." I read it over and over as if it weren't real. As this chapter closes, I want to ask, have you ever thought you'd never be seen by your parents, then suddenly it happened? Share your feelings in the comments. Sometimes those who hurt us most can heal us more than anyone else. And you know what? That ceremony, though I was the centerpiece, had a moment no one expected. And the person who silenced the room wasn't me. I'd never felt so small, and never so complete. The East Room of the White House that day glowed with chandeliers, the soft tap of dress shoes on thick red carpet. I stood waiting behind white wooden doors, uniform pristine medals, aligned white gloves gripping each other lightly. Emotions, I wasn't sure. Maybe calm. Or the strange emptiness of someone who'd traveled too far from their original pain, now standing before a reward they no longer craved. Then the doors opened. My name rang out, Sergeant Emily Carter. I stepped forward. The room stood. People I'd never met, senior officers, powerful politicians, media representatives. And my family sitting silently in the back, quiet amid thunderous applause. Before I tell you about the moment the president pinned the medal on me, someone my own family once saw as a failure, can you share something with me? Have you ever achieved something great, only for the person you wanted to recognize it most to stay silent? Leave a comment. I want to hear your story. Back to the ceremony. The president was a man with bright eyes and a calm, decisive voice. As he approached, I stood at attention, trying not to let my legs shake. He took the Distinguished Service Cross from an aide, turned to me, and spoke without ceremony. Emily Carter didn't just save her teammates. She saved people she never met, never knew by name. She saved the very spirit of leaving no one behind in America. He pinned the cross to my chest beside the Purple Heart and unit badges. The metal ribbon touched my uniform cold as the line between past and present. He didn't look away. "Thank you for your courage. This nation owes you." I said, "Thank you, sir," but in my heart I thought of one person. My father. The ceremony went smoothly, other soldiers receiving their due honors. But as I stepped off the podium, no one in the crowd struck me like my mother's stunned, almost bewildered gaze. She covered her mouth, clearly trying not to cry. Nathan no longer wore his usual smug smile. He looked at me like he'd never known me. And my father, he said nothing. But as I passed, he placed a hand on my shoulder. A light squeeze, no words. I paused for a few seconds. Didn't turn, didn't speak. But I felt the shift. Not because he was proud in front of others, but because finally he truly saw me. At the reception afterward, many approached me. Some were senior officers who'd heard of the special operation I was part of. Some were families of those I'd saved, gripping my hand with tearful eyes. A middle-aged woman introduced herself as the mother of a rescued hostage. "I just want to thank you. Because of you, my daughter lived, and my grandchild still has a mother." I nodded, unsure what to say. Each thank you felt like a debt, though I never asked for it. Then Nathan. He approached, no longer the cocky law grad. "You did something I can't even imagine. I was wrong to think you were weak to laugh at your choice." I didn't reply, just looked at him. My silence was the most honest invitation. If you want to start over, do it with actions, not apologies. My mother came next, hugging me unexpectedly. "You make me both proud and ashamed, because I didn't believe in you enough." I realized then I no longer needed those words. I didn't need them to know my worth. I'd stood in gunfire, kept lives alive with blood-soaked hands. I survived not for recognition, but because I had purpose. A reporter asked me at the reception, "How does it feel to be honored at the White House, Sergeant Carter?" I thought for a second, then said, "It feels like hearing someone retell a story I lived through, but they only see the surface. I remember every explosion, every drop of blood. I know I'm worthy not for the medal, but because the people I saved are still alive." That night I received a photo on my phone. My father still in his suit, standing in a university hall under a sign, "We're proud of Emily Carter." A student sent it with a caption, "Professor Carter told your story at yesterday's conference." He cried when he mentioned the chopper crash. I broke down quietly, no one knowing. I didn't need my father to say he loved me. I just needed to know he believed in me. If you've ever walked alone because no one believed in you, if you've carried a choice the world looked down on, leave a comment. I want to know how you overcame it. I never thought I'd stand at the front of a classroom, not as a quiet student blending into a gifted class, but as an instructor. A combat medic trainer at Fort Sam Houston, where I once crawled through dust, sweat, and tears to keep from falling. The circle closed, but I was no longer the same. 6 months after the medal ceremony, I was sent back to Fort Sam with a special task training the next generation of combat medics. No longer the battlefield, but young, eager faces who hadn't yet smelled blood. I opened my first slide with a black and white photo, me and Monica Torres on a mountainside post-retrieval echo. The class went silent. You'll learn many medical skills, emergency protocols, but the most important thing isn't in books. I paused. It's whether you have the courage to run through gunfire for someone who doesn't share your skin color beliefs, or even a name. A hand went up. A young female trainee's voice, "Ma'am, I enlisted because I read about you. I want to be like you." I smiled, not a hero's smile. A gentle one, like placing a hand on a trembling shoulder. "I'm grateful. But do this not to become anyone. Do it to save people you never thought you were strong enough to save. Recognition comes and goes. But lives, they stay." After class, an admin handed me a handwritten envelope. Blue ink neat. Sender Jessica Long. I opened it in the break room. Soft light filtering through the blinds. "Emily, every day I still fight with sleep. But now I'm not fighting alone. Thanks to you. Not just for the skills you used to help me, but for the way you looked at me like I still had value, even when I was shattered. I'm studying nursing. I may never do what you did, but I want to try. And if anyone ever made me believe in unconditional kindness, it's you. Thank you for forgiving. Thank you for existing." I folded the letter, my heart lighter than I knew it could be. 3 weeks later, my father showed up at the center unannounced. He sat quietly in the back during my Tuesday morning lecture. No laptop, no notes, just eyes, watching, as if he wanted to understand not just my words, but what I'd lived. After class, he stayed. We walked the courtyard silent for a long time. Then he said softly, "Before I thought I had to talk a lot to teach you something. Today I think I need to learn." I didn't reply, just nodded. And I knew finally we'd met halfway, not in expectations, but in respect. If you've ever sought family recognition and got it when you no longer needed it, share your story. Your comment might help someone see they're not alone on that journey. That night, I wrote in my journal below the faded line from age 17, "If you don't get into an Ivy League, you're nothing." I added, "I once sought recognition. Now I go to save lives, and that's enough." For the first time in years, I closed the journal, no sadness left inside. This is the end of a journey I thought began at my lowest point. But sometimes you have to walk far from what others define as success to find the path truly meant for you. I didn't start this story to be praised. I wrote to remind myself and anyone who's felt lost that true value doesn't come from grades, titles, or recognition. It comes from the courage to walk your own path, even when no one believes you'll reach the end. Through my journey, maybe you've seen forgiveness is stronger than revenge, compassion heals more than apologies. And sometimes the person who hurt you most can learn to love you most deeply in their own way. If this story touched you, leave a comment. I want to hear your journey. Follow the channel to not miss the next stories, because somewhere in those words you might find yourself again. Thank you for listening from start to finish. Sometimes a storyteller just needs one listener to feel complete.